Okay, hello everybody. This is my first attempt at streaming something, so please be kind. So my name is Stephen McCormick, and I work for IBM Security in particular. I just really want to talk today a little bit about some ideas around best practices for staying secure while supporting home workers. A couple of things before I actually start. Launch into the actual content proper. I do work for IBM and I do work for IBM Security, but this is very much my take, so there's nothing sort of official or endorsed by IBM, my employers, in this particular video. So this is really just some useful information for anybody who might be thinking about security and rolling out different tools to keep things safe and secure while we're all working from home for a little while. Other than that, I'm just going to just fire ahead and just kind of talk about some of the ideas around what's driving people to work at home, apart from the obvious situation in the world today, and what else we might actually be able to learn and to gain around how to keep people safe working from home. So with that, let's just kind of launch in, and we'll have a chat about some of the things that are going on. So right, today there are a number of challenges going on. We talk about global trends. People are moving to more and more businesses have been moving to support remote working. Today's climate, working from home has never been more important. So obviously that is true whether or not you factor in the current COVID-19 situation. We are more and more focusing on getting people working from home. More and more people who are sort of entering the workforce, younger people, young professionals, they expect a certain degree of flexibility. We also sort of see that with main cities and commuter routes and sort of the drive to be ever greener, we do want to reduce the number of car journeys that people have, reduce people's commute times. Balancing the whole work-life situation has become more and more important. So work from home 1 day, 2 days, 3 days a week, that was kind of a global trend anyway. And of course now we are coming to rely on that infrastructure, that work from home capability even more, as we can see when things like the current COVID situation hit. We do need to have tools in place to make sure everyone is able to continue working where possible remotely. It's uncertain times, and we don't really know how long the current situation may continue, whether these situations may happen again in the future, or what else might happen. So organizations may need key operations to continue with temporarily reduced numbers. So if we think about the sort of global pandemic situation that we're facing right now, there are going to be organizations who may well find that they are short a number of employees, a number of key functions in the business may be compromised or have reduced headcount for a couple of weeks while people are recovering, dealing with illnesses or other situations might arise. So you may have a number of people who live in an area. They're now working from home, as are everybody else. If a local ISP has an outage or an issue there, you may find that will result in a number of your team being unavailable or unable to work or support in the same way as they would if they were in the office. So I always like to start with something simple when we think about these kind of challenges and these kind of things. So I've sort of sketched it that start by drawing a strategy, and I think there's three key pillars involved. So take account of the key risks and potential threats. So have a look at your organisation. See what the possible exposures are from people working from home. See what the issues might be if if a certain piece of the organization isn't available, if a certain piece of technology fails, if a certain person is behaving in a particular way, are there knowledge gaps or skills gaps in the organizations, or understanding gaps in terms of how people address data security and data privacy, and try and see if you can identify where the weaker points might be, and see if you can figure out what potential threats you might need to face. Step 2, ensure you can properly authenticate users and provide access to the tools they need. So there is two pieces to that. Okay, so maybe you in an office-based environment, you're used to being able to see. You can see who's sitting at a workstation. You can walk around and see who's doing what job in what location, and you have a certain degree of visibility and control over who's accessing what, because it's it's local and it's visible, and you can physically go and see the person sitting at the desk and see that they are who you expect them to be. You also then need to be able to make sure that everyone has access to the tools they need. So that's true whether people are working remotely on mobile devices, whether they're working in home offices, on laptops, or whether they're working in the office. Everyone needs access to the tools they need. And you need to make sure that the person who's getting access to those tools is the person that you think it is. So I think that probably makes a lot of sense. We'll talk in more detail about that in a couple of moments. Step 3 is stay flexible. Put contingency plans in place to allow your teams to cover different roles if required. So as I mentioned before, the current COVID situation is going to mean that, unfortunately, a number of people across the world are going to get sick. We don't know how things are going to develop, but there may well be a situation where, if you've got a small security team or a small, highly skilled team within your organization, maybe there is a role that is covered by 2 or 3 or even 4 or 5 people. What happens if all 5 of those people are unavailable at the same time, owing to an illness or a data outage or something else that might happen that would temporarily remove those people from your business for a short or medium term? How can you possibly manage that, and are you able to allow people to cover different roles? Maybe you've got a number of people in the organization who understand a certain process, but only 1 or 2 people have access to run that process remotely. Do you have the flexibility to assign other people to that task? Even if you can give someone the skills and the training, can you then give them access to the data and to the online tools and to the applications that they might need to do that? And how quickly could you do that? And of course, when the situation returns to a more normal state of affairs, can you revoke that access, and can you get visibility of what that person did while they had that temporarily uplifted access? So these are the kind of things I suppose to think about, how you're going to manage it, and how you're going to put in some tools around that. So we start with the top one, taking account of the risks. These are just some things to consider. This doesn't cover every single eventuality. It doesn't cover every organisation. These are some of the more common things that I talk to my customers about. There's some of the more common things that come up in things like analyst reports and sort of things I have been from talking to sort of experts within my working life. These are things that come up quite a bit. So many workers working from home, it's more important to ensure that your users have access to tools they need and that those tools are delivered securely. So if you have a situation where someone is working from home and they don't have access to a particular resource that they normally would have access to in the office, they are going to look for workarounds. They're going to look for shortcuts. They may contact their colleagues over other tools, so maybe they're going to use if you've got something like Slack, or you've got Microsoft Teams or something like that. That's a great way of people communicating with each other and being able to sort of share information in a way that you have sort of visibility of. If you don't have something like that, they may well be sharing things over WhatsApp groups and sort of text chains and things like that, which might be might well have a level of security around it, but you've no visibility, and you might have potentially GDPR protected data or personally identifiable information about your clients leaving your organization and being sent from one person to another via WhatsApp. So making sure that people have access to the tools they need is really important in order to make sure that people aren't looking for those workarounds, aren't looking for less secure or less visible ways of doing things. So that is key. And of course, when you're delivering these tools, they need to be delivered securely. So they're making sure that when you give someone a log on or an access to a particular tool or a particular piece of software, that it is the person you think that you want to give that access to, that is the person ultimately using it, that they're using it correctly, and that if there is any suspicious or unauthorized or unwarranted behavior or access or usage on those tools, that you can monitor that and respond in a practical way. You also need to think about more critical functions, so things that traditionally you would have kept to a secure location, things that you might have been might have kept happening in your network operation center or your security operation center. Those functions may also now need to be managed remotely for a time. This means privileged accounts will also be used remotely. So your systems administrators, maybe you had a certain tool to keep those people in house. Maybe there are certain accesses that have always been local access only. Those now need to be opened up to being used remotely, or if they were already been accessed remotely, certainly the frequency and the number of users accessing them remotely on a daily basis will increase. So that increases the potential for something to go wrong, or the risk of the remote access being from an unauthorized source. So you need to step up the way those accounts are monitored and managed, to make sure that you're looking at all possible eventualities, particularly when we talk about the privileged accounts. When we say privileged accounts, we're talking things that are accessing particularly sensitive information or high level access, so administrator level access and top level access into these resources. The current environment, things that would always have been one-to-one happening in the office, so onboarding new employees, managing levers and assigning access to different tools on short, medium or long-term basis, this all needs to happen remotely as well. So you need to be able to create new accounts, deliver training, revoke access to people who are leaving the organization, people who are sort of changing roles, getting promoted, moving to different jobs. All of that needs to happen remotely, and you need to have the full visibility and control to assign access to new applications, to build out new accounts, and of course to revoke and to shut down accounts as needed as well. And again, these are things that need to be done remotely. Needs to happen in a very sort of fluid and a very quick way. I think we can all imagine a scenario where someone leaves a role. They may still have their laptop for a day or two before they send it back. If that laptop has full access to all of the company data and they're moving to a role at a competitor, or moving to set up their own business, they may well take some information from your organization over that might help them in their new role or the new position, and you certainly don't want that. If a percentage of your staff are unavailable at the same time, do you have the skills to keep the business running, or will outside help be required? So this kind of feeds into one of the things I was saying earlier about potentially you may have to sort of assign new roles, or indeed you may find a situation where you have someone who has a very specialized role within your organization, and there just isn't skills to cover that person if they are out of office for a time, or if a particular person and their backup person are both out at the same time. How do you cover that? Do you need to have a third party, whether that be an IT services provider, whether that be a particular business consultant, whether it be a accountancy, whatever it might be, whatever the skill might be? Will you have to bring in outside help? And if you do, how are you going to provide access to the information that might be needed? So if your accounting department or the person who manages your books is unavailable for a time, and you need to bring in an outside agency or someone else to help and support that, how can you remotely grant that access to this third party provider, and then how can you make sure that they are doing just the things they are supposed to be doing? And then once your primary person returns to role, how can you revoke that access and make sure there's nothing else leaving the organization that ought not to be? Couple of things which can be pitfalls, so places where some organizations may fall down, and this is entirely understandable. These are things which I think we can all be guilty of, particularly when we see a gap or a challenge or a security issue. We tend to overcompensate a little bit, and some of the things that trip us up are here. So make sure to invest in the right solution for your business. So tools that are too complex introduce risks. So oftentimes organizations will go out and they will buy the biggest and most complicated and top of the market, top of the line security solution, and that can cause some problems. So the main one I see an awful lot of is people buying really complex, in-depth solutions, and it's never properly deployed. They don't have the skills in house to manage it. It can be overly burdensome on the organization to either have it supported, or to just basically to roll it out and get it working the way it's supposed to. So rather than fixing a particular risk or a particular business challenge, these tools can actually introduce additional risks because they're not deployed or configured properly, so they're not doing the job they're supposed to do. So you still have the initial gap that you had, and you may indeed have loaded information or provided access to this tool, which is now accessing other things in a less than ideal way. Second point, security can't disrupt business operations. Security is what I do, so security is my main focus. But you've got to be, I'm always very aware, and I have been corrected because I wasn't always very aware of this, that security can't disrupt business operations. So security might seem like the most important thing in the world when you've got an issue or a challenge, or when you spot a gap in how things are working. But it's really important that the security you put in place doesn't disrupt how your business is running. So people need to be able to do their day-to-day jobs. By all means, sometimes you need to have things that will come between people and a particular process and a particular way of doing things. But it really shouldn't impinge on someone doing their job. Someone's job shouldn't be more difficult because of the security tools that you've put in place. This is and the reason for this is people will always start looking for workarounds and other ways of doing things if the security tools get in the way of them doing the job that they want to do. And ensure your tools are future-proofed. So the tag here is security that sits still isn't secure for long. So the bad guys and the threat actors that are out there in the wider world, they don't sit still. They're constantly looking for new ways to do things, new ways to attack, new vectors to access data they shouldn't have access to. So if your tools aren't reacting and responding to changes in the wider world, it may be secure today, but it will only be a day or two before a new hack, exploit, or bug or something else emerges that the bad guys will then begin to use against us. So your tools, whenever it is you deploy, needs to really be able to respond to that as things move forward. Two big things, and I sort of hinted at this earlier on, is complexity and cost are the two main things that cause security programs to fail. So if something requires too many staff or too many hours in a person's day, if your security team or your IT team or whoever has responsibility for IT security, if they are running at capacity or close to capacity, and you dump a new solution in on top of them, that they just don't have the time to work on, it will get neglected and it won't be properly patched out, it won't be properly managed, won't be properly set up and deployed, it certainly won't be configured, and indeed if you set up something like a SIEM, so that's security incident and event management, if you set up something like that, where it's going to start producing an awful lot of data as to what's happening across your network, and you may get reports and issues and all of these things, unless you've got the skills, the resources, and just the time really to process those incidents and event warnings. What's the point of having all this data and intelligence if you don't have someone there to sort of action it, and there's no security analyst to look at this data and to identify where the risks are and to react and respond to those? It's only partially completed, and sooner or later those warnings start to get ignored, and important things get missed. So making sure that whatever it is you're putting in place, that there is the people skills. And if there isn't the people skills within your organization, perhaps the way to do it is to look at a managed service provider who can actually do these things for you as a service, and will monitor the other things for you. Complex setup requirements. So if something is very complicated, again, sometimes we need complex tools. It's just making sure that you have the resources and the tools and the expertise available. And if that requires going external to your organization and sort of buying in expertise as a consultancy or as a managed service, It's understanding that before you pull the trigger on a project is very important. Reliance on professional services for basic tasks. So if there are simple things that your organization has the skills to do, or could very quickly acquire the skills to do the basic things, the basic configurations, the basic moves and changes, if that is something you have the resources and the ability to do, well then relying on professional services can drive the cost up a little higher. Really, the professional services and the managed services that you might invest in should be for things you don't have the skills to do. If the tool you have deployed requires professional services for absolutely everything, even really simple, basic day-to-day functionality, maybe take a look at that tool and see if it's the right fit and right size for your organization. And if it is, and if it all makes sense, and if you do want to proceed that way, definitely do some sort of cost analysis on what the professional services are likely to cost you over the full life of the solution, because that can be that can be a little unclear at the start. And then specifically talking about PAM, which is privileged access manager or privileged access management for those top level accounts. A lot of times you see people who have limited or partial deployments on those tools, and what that ends up doing is you have a certain degree of visibility, but you're missing things, and there are certain features and functionalities in those management tools that are not being utilized, and that will result in obviously high level access accounts being used improperly, and you not having the visibility of that. So I've spoken a couple of times about what happens when you put in solutions that sort of get in the way of productivity, and people start looking for workarounds and start using unauthorized applications and unauthorized processes, making up their own way of doing things. Usually, it has to be said, when people do stuff like that, it is driven by a desire just to get their job done, rather than trying to do anything unauthorized. But the umbrella term, so this was the industry term, if you like, for that sort of activity, sort of unapproved applications, systems and tools that you haven't endorsed, is shadow IT. So the fact here is growing number of apps and devices exponentially increases the risk of cyber attacks and regulatory non-compliance. So GDPR and other sort of regulatory compliance states, you can't be compliant if you don't know what your end users are using. I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, if you don't know that your users are using WhatsApp for business, if you don't know that someone has a particular amount of data on Dropbox or Google Drive, if there is a security breach or a security issue, as we saw, I think it was last year, there was a security issue in WhatsApp, which was obviously a concern for just about everybody who uses WhatsApp. But when it's sort of communication on a family WhatsApp group, that data being breached is not ideal. But it's far more serious if you have, let's say, a group of doctors in a hospital who are sharing patient records over WhatsApp. And the hospital security admin does not know that's happening, and then there's a security flaw in WhatsApp, then you get into really, really serious issues and really serious concerns and potentially damaging situations. The real world number here is 71% of organizations report that employees have violated security policies by using cloud apps, which can lead to malware infections and data breaches. And fewer than half of all enterprise feel prepared to stop a mobile security incident from happening. So this talks a little bit to sort of mobile devices and mobile shadow IT. Shadow IT, though, exists across the board: laptops, desktops, tablets, all kinds of roles, all kinds of people in the organization. This is not just something that happens at a junior level. This is happening throughout organizations, from very senior people all the way down. And as it's usually driven by productivity requirements, and usually driven by a pragmatic will to just kind of get the job done. But it does open the door to a lot of secure issues. And of course, when you have people who are working from home offices and bedrooms where there is no one looking over the shoulder to see what they're doing, the temptation increases, and the likelihood increases that someone will just download an app or just transfer something on their phone rather than using the official channels. Even at the best of times, privileged access management. So these are your top level accounts. These are the really important ones to look at, so that people have the top level access to your systems. And it probably goes without saying, but just to mention that obviously when someone is looking to breach or to hack your organization, the first thing they're going to try and do, even if they come in at a low level, they get access to some junior member of staff's credentials, they're going to try and leverage the initial access that they have to get them into a privileged account. And this is what we see, that 80% of security breaches involve privileged credentials. So it may not start with a privileged account, but 80% of attacks and breaches do get to privilege level at some point. 60% of IT professionals indicate that you must have this privileged access management security to be compliant with regulations. I think that makes sense as well. One that it is probably an uncomfortable statistic. 54% of companies today use paper or Excel to manage privileged credentials. I think we are, all of us, guilty of being overly reliant on Excel and paper documents, even in this, even in 2020. And we are very reliant on probably last century's tools, that being paper and things like Excel, to manage all sorts of things. But in particular, privileged credentials pose a risk if they're being held in less than secure, places like spreadsheets and other things like that. And then, of course, the big scary number is the average cost of data breach is 3.64 million. This scales very much, so larger organizations, a breach will cost them much more than that. Smaller organizations will a breach tends to be quite a lot smaller as well. But even if we're talking about a smaller organization losing access to 10 or 15,000 customer records, you're looking at sort of costs in the hundreds of thousands of pounds, euros, or dollars, whatever your local currency is. A small size data breach at a small organization is going to be as crippling to that organization, in fact possibly even more so, than a massive large scale breach at the likes of Target or BA or any of the other high profile attacks that we've seen over the last number of years. The likes of the global large organizations that always make the headlines, those guys have huge teams. They have huge security resources. They have all kinds of things in place. They tend also to have contingency planning built into the financials as to how they can kind of cover these costs, deal with the damage to reputation. They have PR people who can get out in front of that. They have IT teams who can sort of shut down breaches and correct it. And then obviously there are ways which those guys have stuff built into the budget to cover off GDPR fines and other sort of the other cost elements. Smaller organizations have much less in the way of resources. So while the actual cost to a smaller organization might be expressed in terms of hundreds of thousands rather than hundreds of millions, the smaller organizations are often the ones that go under and that suffer the worst. It's also worth pointing out that just because the headlines are always about really large organizations, that doesn't mean that large organizations are the only ones targeted. Smaller organizations right down to 10, 15, 20 seat organizations are being targeted. Globally, the globally cybercrime makes more money than the drugs trade. That crossover point was 2 or 3 years ago. It's more lucrative than the drugs trade is now, and the organisations running it are very much sort of professional. They know what they're doing. They put out high volumes of attacks, and the attacks are very much sort of targeted across the board. So just because you're a smaller organisation that flies below the radar to an extent does not mean you are safe. If your organisation is connected and online, if your users are operating in a connected online world, you are potentially a target. And while the cost to you might not be 3.64 million, it could well be enough to do some serious damage to your business and to your reputation as well. So worth bearing in mind some of those things. So taking account of the risks, and I'm just talking here particularly about privileged accounts and remote workers. Just some questions, maybe to ask yourself. So, do you know how many privileged accounts you have? So who has privileged access? Where are they? Who's using these accounts? How are you securing and auditing access to those accounts? So is it a sort of situation that there are people of a particular level of seniority or particular roles within your organization that get access to these accounts? How often do you say, does that person still need access to that tool? How often do you track where an account is being accessed from? How regularly do you do all of these things? How easily can you rotate privileged account passwords? So how easily can you change or update a password? So these passwords should probably be refreshed on a regular basis anyway. So you obviously need a process to do that. But also, if an account was breached, how quickly could you change password to these privileged accounts without disrupting operations? What's the process when an IT admin leaves the organization? How do you monitor their access to sensitive systems? And how confident are you with being able to enforce the password policies, across the organization? So again, just some things to ask yourself, and just maybe some things you can ask of your own organization. How do you control and limit third-party access to sensitive systems? So, going back a couple of years, third-party access to sensitive systems was probably quite rare. You might have had an IT company that did all of that for you, and you didn't have to think about that. Now, more and more, because of how data drives more and more businesses, you could have all kinds of people, contractors, consultants, business partners. If you're involved in joint ventures, are you sharing data and access to tools? Do you have someone who comes in and does the accounts, and what systems are they accessing to draw the information that they need? Do you have external auditors coming in to check your business, for compliance with different regulatory standards? All of these things, I suppose, sort of stack up and build up, and these are all different people who are coming in and accessing data, and may well be accessing sensitive systems. And it's important to be able to understand where that might be coming from and what risk might come along with that. Compliance is obviously a really big one, and the GDPR is obviously the one that we talk most about here in Europe, but there are obviously other standards, PCI, HIPAA, and NIST, and other things like that. So how do you ensure compliance with those within your business? How do you implement IAM? Here stands for Identity Access Management, and how does that and how is that relating to privileged accounts? So this is about authenticating that the people who are accessing the systems are who you believe them to be, and that this goes back to what we're talking about, the right person having access to the right tools. And does your SIEM strategy, so SIEM, as I mentioned before, is security, incident and event management, does that have insights into privileged account usage and activity? So, for example, if you have a privileged account that is usually run by your system administrator, who is normally at your office, wherever your office might be, or at their home 10 or 15 miles from your office, and all of a sudden that person accesses that account accesses data from an IP address in China or the Philippines or somewhere else in the world at 2 or 3 in the morning, do you have something that will red flag that access? Do you have something that will call that out as being inappropriate? And then is there a way that your organization can either flag that to a human being, or if, as often happens, it's happening at 2 in the morning, is there a way that your internal setup can recognize this as questionable and suspend access until it's been vetted and checked off by someone and validated? So these are maybe some things to think about, and some ideas. So moving on, the next thing I said was important was to ensure that you can properly authenticate and provide access to what people need. So just a couple of quick headings: discover, manage and audit, monitor and control, and secure and protect. So obviously, when we talk discover, it's how can you identify what accounts you have across the entire landscape. So across your entire organization, how can you identify what accounts are out there? So who has access? Who's accessing? If you need to bring people into the organization and give people access to new tools, can you onboard them easily so they can be secured and managed very simply? If you use continuous process to maintain control of access, so obviously making sure that you use a continuous process is really important, because you don't just want to sort of give people access to tools on their first day and then revoke the tools when they leave. People's roles changes, the tools people have change, the data that might be stored in different locations might change. The degree of sensitivity of data being stored on a particular server or in a particular content resource might change, and you need to stay on top of that and make sure that you're not providing sort of blanket access to data that could potentially expose you to risk. If just because this person works for me, that they may not necessarily need access to all of the data they currently have access to. Feeds a little bit into the manage and audit stage. So it's a good idea to have workflows for obtaining privileged access. So if we're talking about privileged accounts again, do you have a way of having an actual workflow, an actual process that allows someone gain privileged access to a particular system? How do you secure passwords and the secure keys for privileged accounts? Obviously, you want a secure place to keep those. You want to be able to rotate and change passwords automatically, so those passwords should expire depending on the sensitivity on a relatively frequent basis, such that if I have access today, maybe I need to be on a particular list tomorrow, or my access goes away. So the passwords should change on a daily basis. If I'm still someone who should have access tomorrow, I will still have access. If not, the password has been changed. My previous credentials don't work anymore. And a comprehensive audit trail of activities. So if I'm logging into your system as a privileged account, what did I do while I was logged in? What did I access? What did I change? What did I move? Where did I do it from? That's important to know and understand, so you can actually figure that out. As far as monitoring and control, it kind of feeds in again from that audit trail. Know exactly when, how, why your privileged accounts are being used. Record and monitor privileged session activity for audit and forensics, and then stop malware at the endpoint. So if we are seeing a device connecting into a privileged account, and we notice that device has malware on it, so maybe I'm using a laptop or a mobile phone or a tablet to access some content using a secure account. How do you know that my device isn't capturing privileged information? So I've got a window open, I've got a session running that is accessing particular information in the background on my device. Something else is running which is capturing my screen, and it is recording the screen, it is recording the data I'm looking at, and is sending that off to a third party. I may not be aware that that's there. You may not be aware that it's there, but what's happening is the privileged credentials and all the security that you put around that privileged data is invalidated by the fact that I have some malware on my device which is capturing the information that I'm looking at. Secure and protect. So these are fairly obvious things. So prevent unauthorized use of privileged accounts. I think that makes sense. Enforce least privilege policies on endpoints. This is a really interesting concept. So least privilege just means what is the minimum amount of information you can give to someone and still have them able to do their job. So if you have someone who's a system administrator, but they don't need necessarily to have top level access to every single thing in a system, they're just administering a particular process or a particular function or a particular part of how the business works, they shouldn't necessarily have access to every single thing in the organization. If you've got someone else who's managing a different silo of information, similarly, they shouldn't have access to the process that's been managed by someone else. Everyone should have access to what they need, but only what they need, and only for the duration that they need it as well. So I think it may come up in a later slide, but the mantra here is that you're giving access to the right data at the right time to the right person for the right reasons. So if the data changes, if the person changes, if the reason they're getting access to change it, or the time that they need it changes, then their access should change too. So it's all about making sure that people have what they want, what they need, but only what they need, and only for the duration of time that they actually need it. Define and enforce policies to control local privileges for endpoint users. That makes sense, I think, too. And then improve security by limiting privileges for business and IT users. So making sure that people are accessing the correct data aligned with their role, as I just said. So just there's a couple more things I want to talk about here. It's maybe a slight change of pace here from the sort of the broad talking about the business challenges to thinking about the different people in your organization. And I've broken this out into three categories really. So if you think about your employees, the IT security admins, and the business leaders. So each of those three pillars or parts of the organization, they have different challenges, they have different requirements, different levels of understanding of what security is, and different ways of thinking about how these things are deployed. So broadly speaking, your employees, they want to get the work done. They need new tools. They need innovative ways of doing that. This whole work from home world that we all live in has introduced new challenges, and they need something. They need you as an organization to respond and to help them get the job done. If you're going down a cloud route, and obviously with sort of restricted access to data centers, and if you've got your own setup in the office, it may be hard to get people in to install and manage and do things in a central way. So cloud tools and cloud solutions are really useful. They're really useful in any environment at any time, but in particular at this time where sort of centralized management of IT is incredibly difficult. Cloud services that are managed external to your organization, where you don't have that challenge of keeping things patched, updated, and running, cloud services are really useful. And employees understand that. We are all consumers of technology in our personal lives, and as employees, we have expectations that the tools our employers make available to us are at least on a par with what we use in our own daily lives. So if someone is using Dropbox, they're using WhatsApp to communicate with their family, they're using social media and social tools all of the time in their personal lives, they're going to expect that what they use in their professional life has the same degree of intuitiveness, of user friendliness, and there's a certain assumption of security that comes with a lot of these tools, and people just want to be able to just sort of jump in and use them. So this seamless experience across applications is an expectation that everyone will have. If you sit in the security admin stack, you're probably going to be looking at things like keeping the budgets down, particularly in these challenging times. There is always another requirement for budget, so you don't want to spend if you can avoid it, and certainly you don't want to increase your workload with any degree of complexity. That leads to sort of looking at things like automation and consolidation. How can you kind of put all things in the same place, and how can we automate it? How can we allow people to self-serve to an extent in terms of getting access to what they need? But also we need to strengthen the authentication. So we want to do things for less money and less work, but also strengthening the security. And I think that probably will chime with anyone watching this who is involved in IT security. Business leaders then, so the people at the top, people who are sort of shaping policy and strategy for businesses, they understand that they need to move fast to get a competitive edge. They want to get applications. So if as a business you decide to onboard a new application, it is no good onboarding an application today when everybody is already working from home and already has been working from home for a couple of weeks. You have that issue that has been going on as a challenge for probably too long already. So you need, when you make a decision, you need to be able to roll that out and deploy it very, very quickly. And as far as security goes, any sort of data breach is disastrous to brand reputation. So obviously the business leaders will have a very strong focus on making sure that doesn't happen. So just to talk a little bit about the different things, let's have a look at some of the key pain points and what they actually really want. So employees, very simple. They have multiple usernames and passwords, and they find it difficult to get access to new applications. Their goal: security work from anywhere on any device, gain access to resources quickly, and work efficiently and without roadblocks. So they don't want things getting in the way of them doing the job that they want. Pain points for the IT security admin: they may lack skill dependencies. So there may be issues there where end users and business leaders are relying on IT to perform certain tasks. They would much rather not have the organization dependent on them and allow people to self-serve to an extent, and obviously free up their key people, the IT people, the security people, and have them focused on doing more strategic level things rather than hand holding or doing sort of day-to-day setup things like that. They may feel there's a lack of control over application access, that once an application is rolled out and someone has been given access to it, that they find it difficult to revoke that access or to add a new user, remove things. And this feeds into obviously the idea that heritage tools, these have been around for a while, things that might have been okay, 4 or 5, 6 or 7 years ago, are probably too complex. They probably don't do the job well enough, and they may not, tools that were built for largely on-premise applications, and sort of in office and in-house apps and things like that, may not well suit the increasingly cloud-based environment that many organizations are looking into and are moving to. Particularly when we talk about things like kind of hybrid cloud, where there's a hybridization of cloud applications, local applications, and all of these other things. Last generation identity access management tools probably are a little overly complex and probably creaking a little bit to cope. So what the admins are looking at, they want to extend on-premise investment. So if you've got those tools, you've got those heritage tools that are maybe starting to creak a little bit, how can we better leverage them? How can we use them and maximize the investment we've made with them, but sort of reducing the complexity and maybe just taking some of the load off them and making it a little bit easier to manage those tools and applications. Simplify employee access, so making sure that the employees are able to get what they need in a much more simple way, and ideally that employees can request things in an automated way and get access to things in a much easier way without someone within the IT team, which is probably already stretched, having to sort of manually add an access or revoke access to different tools. And then, of course, the business is demanding cloud applications and is demanding tools and things be delivered. So they need to satisfy those demands. That makes sense. The business leaders then they don't like wasting time waiting on IT. So if a request goes into an IT department and the IT department is dealing with 24 other things, the business leaders sort of feel that is time wasted. There is a business requirement right now that can't be fulfilled because there is a queue of tasks within the IT stack. This means you get dissatisfaction from employees. That is an issue that management has to deal with. I spoke earlier on that all of us are consumers of technology in our personal lives. We all have a certain expectation for user friendliness and ease of use and intuitiveness that we have when we get applications on our phone that we use in our personal lives, and we expect that to be replicated in our professional lives as well. And of course, with traditional technologies introduce a dissatisfaction, it also stops employees innovating and sort of moving up with fast new ideas. There's nothing worse than trying to fulfill a customer requirement, but a legacy tool or a legacy piece of technology is frustrating your ability to actually deliver on a customer requirement or on a business requirement because the technology can't move or can't adapt to the role. And we are all living in times now where adapting and changing how we do things is critical. Sometimes even critical to sort of business survival in some cases, and that we'd be able to adapt and innovate and come up with new ways of delivering things to our customers. So the goal of the business manager, they want to be able to get those applications to employees quickly, add users quickly without waiting on IT, and leverage the latest cloud applications at the speed of the business. So whatever it is, whatever role, whatever business you're in, whatever your focus is as an organization, you need to be able to get that stuff out, deliver those applications to the business, as soon as it needs. So just in time delivery of services that when someone needs it, they've got access and they get it. They get what they need in the simplest possible way. So coming towards the end here, just a couple of other bits and pieces here to tie up. So I did say at the top, one of the key things here was to stay flexible and put contingency plans in place to allow your teams to cover different roles. I've tried not to too much to talk about the current COVID-19 situation. I think at this point most organisations have put in their contingencies and sort of built themselves some solutions and have a setup in place. This situation will pass, but there will be other times in the future when other unexpected things might happen. Whether we're talking about sort of home workers or when things return to a more regular way of doing things. Whether or not your users are privileged account users or not, they still need access to the tools they need to do their jobs, and roles and responsibilities may change. So whatever tools, whatever solutions, whatever you're putting in terms of remote work, whatever you're putting in terms of security, make sure that what you're building is flexible enough to give you a firm view of who has access to what resources in the organization, and to make changes as soon as they're needed. So whatever it is we do and however we do things, the ability to sort of change and adapt to situations as they arise is key. And the whole concept of agility, I think, is well understood, but it does bear thinking about, because oftentimes the security solutions that you put in and the security wrap that goes around certain things can reduce that agility, and it's always worth doing an assessment and a trade-off to understand, okay, yeah, this is the security we need, and by definition that comes with a reduction in the agility, But where's the tipping point? Where have we gone too far? And if the solution you're deploying is overly complex or is overly restrictive on your end users, it may not be the right solution for your business, and it might be worth looking at something that is equally robust as far as security goes, but just a little better able to adapt to your own particular business requirement. And as I've said it before, remember always to focus on giving access to the right data to the right users at the right time and for the right reasons. So right data, right and right users, that is probably the two things everyone thinks about. It's the time and reasons, I would say, that are often overlooked. So I need access to this today. Do I still need it tomorrow? Will I still need it in 4 weeks, 4 months, 4 years? And who is tracking that, and of course the right reasons as well. So are you giving access to data to someone just because they sit in a system admin role, or because they're in a senior management role? Is that reason enough? Do they have direct responsibility for the process, for the data that you're giving them access to? And if they don't, would it be better for them to not have that data on an ongoing basis? For sure, if a particular project or requirement arises that someone needs access to something that is outside of their remit, then by all means we want to have tools to be able to do that. But just because someone is working on a project for 3 weeks that requires them to have senior top level access to a particular set of data, that doesn't mean that they should have that forever. And I suppose that would be the takeaway I'd put on that. Finally, and I did touch on this earlier on, just to talk about it a bit more. The current COVID-19 situation, it's ongoing, and it may arise where some key members of your team might be unavailable due to sickness, connections issues. So with everyone working from home, a lot of us are relying on our internet service providers and various other things. There may be bandwidth issues, there may be connections issues. You may have a couple of team members if they're living close together, or if people are living out in more rural locations. Internet outages, downtimes, things like that can have an effect. So if you've got a critical member of your business who is sick and is unable to work, or is in an area where their connectivity is a little patchy, or other unforeseen circumstances, and I think COVID-19 has basically just written large for us what can happen unexpectedly and in very short timescales. How what we would see as the normal way of doing business needs to change and adapt. So things can happen, in an unpredictable way. So if you've got small teams and niche skills in your organizations, those resources may be unavailable for a time. You may choose to bring in a contractor, a managed service provider, or to upskill another member of staff. It's critical to have a plan in place to deal with these eventualities. So how do you get those skills out? How do you hire those contractors? How do you bring in those managed service providers? When you do that, how do you give them access to the information? And we are talking about things here where there are small teams and niche skills. So they're probably those small teams and niche skills have access to very sensitive information about how your business works. So making sure that the access is granted and monitored it can be very important. So whether we're talking about creating access to your systems for a managed service provider or a contractor, or providing access to new resource for team member, and crucially monitoring what's done with that access. And then of course the most important thing is when your regular team return to work, when connectivity issues are restored, or when we all get back to I hesitate to use the word normal, but when we all get back to the previous way of doing things, get back to sort of more office-based interaction, how are you going to revoke that access, and how are you going to maybe close the door on some of those things that we've put in place to cover the current challenges. That is all from me. You can certainly like and subscribe to this particular YouTube channel. I've put some other resources on the screen there. So if you're interested in any of the particular things I've spoken about here in terms of security and all of the other bits and pieces here, there are some links on screen there. So ibm.com/security is where all of the IBM product suites are listed out. Again, I do work for IBM, but everything I've spoken about today is my own opinions. If you are looking for some solution stuff, the IBM set is there. Other vendors are certainly available if you want to go and investigate those. SecurityIntelligence.com is a security blog. There's some really good articles, information that up there. But things that can help you out. xforce.ibmcloud.com as well is just more information and resources around security challenges. You can follow IBM Security on Twitter. And of course, you can follow me here on YouTube. I'll be adding more information here as well. You can also look me up at Steve McCormack at 1979 on Twitter. I'll stick that link in the description as well. And then there's the IBM Security Solutions YouTube channel as well if you want to learn a little bit more about that. If you've got any direct questions, anything you want to know, anything that you would like to discuss with me personally about anything in the video, drop me a comment below and I'll respond either by direct message or to the comments directly. So thanks very much. Appreciate your time watching this. As I said, please do like and subscribe, and feel free to share this video across anybody else who you think might be interested. Thanks very much.